Welcome. Welcome to all of you who have joined tonight, joining the IAWE, the Israel Association of Writers in English. It's a really great pleasure to welcome you all, and especially to welcome Jonthan, especially Jonthan Wilson, whose ninth book is getting these amazing reviews that are not enough. They can't give you enough praise for this book. This is a book that I keep stopping to check the facts. I never do that. And they're always right, or almost always. Most of you, many of you know previous novels by Jonthan. You probably know the two novels that were about Mandate Palestine, The Hiding Room, and the Palestine Affair that won prizes in their time, but nothing like what you're going to win now. Perhaps some of you know the short story collections, the two short story collections, Shum and Ambulance is on the Way, and the soccer book Kick and Run. You may know all of these, but you have probably not had a chance to read The Red Balcony, since it's only been out for 2 days. And you have to be really fast. You could get the Audible and turn it on speed. But better to read it slowly and read it well. Because every fact here is important. Every fiction is important. It's a real page turner. You're really going to like it. And there's another reason I really like it, and that's because Jonthan is a scholar and has written books on Chagall, on Bellow. I mean, he knows how to do his research. So you're going to really enjoy this book when you read it. And I hope you'll also enjoy Jonthan. I know that you're all on mute and we're all ready.
Hi, Karen. Sorry.
Hi,
hello, everybody. Hello, Jonthan.
Hi.
Welcome to our Zoom. I do apologize. Traffic was awful.
Thank you very much. And I have just introduced Jonthan, and we'll start all over because so many people have come in since then. Jonthan Wilson might be remembered or has been remembered by many friends of mine who say, oh, the guy, that beautiful man who taught at Hebrew University and then at Tel Aviv University. I was in love with him. So you are remembered. It's not, if not as a famous author, as a very, very good lecturer.
Yeah, thanks.
And you have lived through.
All right, moving right along.
Moving right along. Okay, we're going to start again with The Red Balcony, which is the 9th book that Jonthan has published and will now be the biggest as far as I'm concerned, because it has so much history. Jonthan, please take over because I'm babbling with enthusiasm.
What do you want me to talk about?
I would like you to talk about what is The Red Balcony about.
Okay.
And we can then discuss it if you like.
Okay.
The questions come at the end.
Yeah. And I hope there'll be some questions from you, because I believe you have relatives who were in the car that drove Arlosorff to the hospital, unless I'm mistaken. The real story. The Red Balcony is set in the aftermath of the murder of Arlosorff for the most part of the novel, although it begins with a scene that was very inspirational for me, which was a photograph I saw of the swastika flag flying from the Hotel Fast in 1933. The Hotel Fast, which I knew when I lived in Jerusalem as the Barclays Bank on the corner of Ben Yehuda Street. In 1933, it was the Hotel Fast, and catered to a lot of German tourists visiting the Holy Land. And after Hitler came to power, he switched the flag. There were two alternate Nazi German flags for a bit. One was the Nazi swastika, and the Hotel Fast ran it up next to the Union Jack. And I remember seeing this image and being astonished by it, and found it quite chilling to see a swastika flying over Jerusalem. And I'd written two previous novels set during the British Mandate, one of which, and both of which in a way took as their springboard actual historical political assassinations, one from Lord Moyne in, I think, 1941, and Jacob de Haan in 1924, which is a Palestine affair. The inspiration for, I think, the trigger for all the novels, in a way, was the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin and the conversation that took place afterwards, the sort of shock and the long discussion about how unprecedented this was, and how Jews simply did not politically assassinate other Jews, when, of course, history tells us a different story. And I wanted to look into the aftermath of the Arlosorov murder. It's a story about, and I merge historical figures and fictional characters. And it's a story about a young man, a young British Jewish man, Ivor Castle, who's just graduated in jurisprudence from Balliol College, Oxford, and who comes out to Mandate Palestine to assist the lawyer, the chief barrister for the defense in the Arlosorov case, who in my novel is a fictional character named Phineas Barron. And he gets involved with a potential witness, Siona Kerem, who may or may not be a key figure in the defense as a witness, may or may not be able to provide an alibi. And there are various ramifications. I won't give away the whole plot. Of course, there's no need to tell you what Arlosorov's fate was. And there are a lot of twists and turns in the plot. And one of the things that I had to assist me while I was writing was I was able to get on Abe Books a transcript of the major speeches at the trial that was published just a couple of months. I think I have it here somewhere. Just a couple of months after. Oh, here it is. Here it is. I'll show you the page. I'm going to kick out with this. It was published in Jerusalem just a couple of months after the trial had ended in 1934, and it's an extraordinary book, extraordinary documents, because the trial itself, when you read the documents, turns out to be conducted by these extraordinarily sophisticated Rumpole of the Bailey type British barristers. The British barristers, by the way, were allowed to wear wigs in 1934. And the British judges, the Jewish and Arab judges, weren't allowed to wear wigs. They were just there to cancel each other out in the decision making. And the trial itself is just quite an extraordinary experience, and I was blown away by the incredible detail and the incredible sophistication of the speeches and the documents. And it's as you know, it's a sort of a case that remains unsolved to this day, and it's a case that I think cements, rather than puts in place, but cements the schism between the right and the left that we witness the ramifications of to this present day. It widened the split, it broadened the chasm, something that has never been filled, never come together again. So in that way, it represents a fascinating starting point for a view of the history that leaches into the present. So that's I don't want to give away too much of what happens in the plot, but that's pretty much what the novel is about. I remember when I was writing the novel, at one point, when Netanyahu had been accused of corruption, one of his aides said, next they're going to accuse him of murdering Arlosorov. So I thought, oh, you know, this place, this still lingers in the imagination. My favorite moment, though, writing the novel was I was in Israel a few years ago, right at the beginning of the novel, and I got involved, which was a mistake, in a political conversation with a taxi driver. And at one point I asked him who he thought murdered Arlosorov, and he said, it's not a man, it's a street. And I thought, yeah. And I thought, yeah. It was just wonderful response. But of course, the street starts at the site of Arlosorov's murder, which was where the beach in front of the Hilton Hotel now is. So it's no accident that the street starts there, and that's where the novel begins too. Well, the novel begins with the running up of the swastika flag, and then moves. There's a chapter featuring Arlosorov, and for the most part, with very few exceptions, I try not to put into the historical figures' mouths anything that they didn't actually say or believe in. With the fictional characters, of course, I have endless freedom. So that's the story of the red balcony of the title. Siona Kerem, the sort of femme fatale of the novel, lives in an apartment on Bezalel Street in Jerusalem. Not that I have to admit is not too different to one that I lived in myself, which was in the house that Boris Schatz built in the grounds of the old Bezalel Art School. I lived in that house, and my landlord was his son, Lilik Schatz. And the balcony is, of course, I couldn't call the novel in English The Red Mirpeset, but I would have liked to, because that's her balcony, and it's where some of the serious action takes place. So that's the beginning.
For people who don't know, on the beach, on the promenade in Tel Aviv, at the point of the shooting, there is a andata, how do you say that? A monument to the fact that on this spot, Arlosorov was shot. He wasn't killed, he was shot.
Right.
And further down the promenade is another one that says, here was the Altalina. So you have these two things on the promenade.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's, yeah.
Thank you. It is amazing description of what the book is about. But now perhaps you want to tell us, you want to give us an example, because the whole book doesn't sound like an intellectual conversation about history. It sounds very much alive. Perhaps you have a passage you would like to read.
Sure. Okay. I can read. I'll read you. I'll read you the very first, the sort of prologue to the book, if you like, is the scene in Jerusalem where these two young Arab boys who work at the Hotel Fast are instructed by Herr Curler, who runs the place, to run up the swastika flag over Jerusalem. Then there's a small section that features Arlosorov and culminates in the murder. And then we move to Tel Aviv in August, and I can read you a little of Ivor Castle's, of that chapter. It was Tel Aviv in August 1933. Ivor Castle emerged from the Esther cinema into the yellow slant of early evening sunlight and the unremitting late summer heat he had tried to escape inside. He had been in Palestine for 3 weeks, settling in, taking steps to arrange the official residency that would allow him to take part in the Arlosorov murder trial. It was Ivor's father who had secured him the position of assistant to Mr. Phineas Barron, the distinguished King's Counsel who was leading the defense of the 2 Russian Jews accused of the crime. Edwin Castle, who had prudently changed the family name from Schloss 2 years before the outbreak of the Great War, was himself an eminent barrister, and Ivor had followed in his father's footsteps, graduating from Balliol College, Oxford, with his BA in jurisprudence a year ago. So here he was in steamy Tel Aviv, and this was his first working day that he had allowed himself some free time. For 2 weeks, the Esther had advertised only Austrian language films, a trick, or so he'd been told, to get around the local Jewish boycott of German films, or any that featured a known Nazi actor. There were simply too many eager German-speaking paying customers in the city. Now, mercifully, management had succumbed to the box office bonanza promised by King Kong. Beauty had killed the beast, but who wouldn't want to hold Fay Wray in the palm of his hand? Beauty was responsible for all kinds of problems, including Ivor's own. At Oxford, he hadn't been able to resist with Annabel Benton, and she had married someone else, and the same with Andrea Lowenstein and Clara Halstead, each of them stunning in their own way, and each committed, inexorably it seemed, to both reeling him in and casting him out. His evening was open. He wasn't due in Jerusalem until the following afternoon. Once there, he would conduct a preliminary examination of a potential witness, Tziona Keren, a woman whom the police had somehow overlooked or rather noted and dismissed. She had, according to police notes, sat for a lengthy period in the Jerusalem cafe, where a waiter believed he might have spotted Stavsky and Rosenblatt, the 2 men accused of Arlosorov's murder, in the hours before they set out for Tel Aviv on the night of the killing. And if it was Barron's clients in the Hasharon, and if the hour was late, then how could the accused have managed the 90-minute drive to Tel Aviv in time to murder Arlosorov on the beach? So Barron delegates the task of interviewing Tziona to Ivor, and Ivor is out on a walk. Ivor walked now in the direction of the sea and the cooling breeze that he craved, but it was a forlorn hope. Experience had already taught him that it was better to succumb, to accept the sweat that dribbled down his back and the permanent presence in his pocket of handkerchief to wipe his brow, the clammy sensation of his shirt and shorts stuck to his skin. You have dark hair and an olive skin complexion. You won't burn, his mother had told him shortly before he boarded ship in Southampton. But the hottest place she had ever visited was Provence, and she had taken that holiday with his father in balmy May. Ivor felt his eyebrows singe almost as soon as they docked in Haifa. The tip of his nose was still red, painful to the touch, likewise the back of his neck. In a few minutes, the brown hues of the setting sun would envelop the city, but there would be no relief. The night would bring its own version of life in a cauldron. Ivor arrived at the cafe as the lights came up. He's going to the Casino Cafe, which no longer exists, of course. Ivor arrived at the cafe as the lights came up on all 3 stories. I'm skipping some paragraphs. The place was beginning to fill up, men in long trousers and sports jackets, women in dresses. It seemed to be one of the few recreational spots in the city where formality was regarded as a virtue. At his own hotel, the Bella Vista, an orchestra played 6 nights a week on the patio or in the garden, but neither those who listened nor those who danced followed a dress code. Ivor liked that immediately about Tel Aviv. He had hated wearing his gown at Oxford, or perhaps he had just hated being a Jew there, something that the leveling conformity of the black robe had distinctly failed to hide. So, do you want me to, is that enough? Or?
Oops, it's lovely.
You want a little more, or is that plenty?
I know there are questions already, but I would like to begin with the question of the British involvement in the whole mess that we're in today, that you really you hint at all over the place, and don't, because it's a novel, you don't say. But can you say something more about that?
Well, I do think that there's a tendency not to look. I don't know. Maybe there's not a tendency in Israel, but I think that it's beneficial to look a little further back to the roots of the conflict, and to talk perhaps a little more about British and French colonialism in the Middle East, and the way the place was carved up by the British and the French, and what the French did in Lebanon, and what the British did in Palestine, and what the British and the French did in Egypt, and how there was a complex colonial game being played there, and one of the things that I guess fascinated me is that even by the early 1930s, nothing was fixed in stone, and there were still various sort of streams of conflicting and different notions of what Zionism was and what its potentials were in many different areas, and that it was often guided and instructed and hemmed in and by the British, who we have to say were not in exactly the easiest situation in the world. And one of the reasons why this particular moment is so pivotal, I guess one of the things I should have said about the novel is, of course, the issue surrounding Arlosorov's murder had to do with the transfer agreement, which nobody likes to talk about too much for obvious reasons. And there was this sort of pendulum that would swing, the pressure to allow Jewish immigrants to come from Germany, which in turn would then trigger a response in the local Arab population who didn't want a large influx of Jewish immigrants, and the British sort of playing one side off against the other more or less all the time. So I think, that, I mean, as you say, I'm not writing a history, but I am trying to represent that world and the British impact on the society and on what happened next.
And the German impact, because my husband pointed out when we were reading the book that he always wondered why all the German immigrants at the time came with tiles, with balatot. He said they all came with these very strange things. Well, that was part of the exchange, right?
Yeah.
That was part of it. They were allowed to
bring German goods. Yeah.
goods.
They were only allowed to use their money to purchase German.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that, Jonathan? Because it's a leitmotif that runs through this whole saga. The relations between the Zionist organization and Germany, Nazis, and this transfer. Could you elaborate a little bit? I'm sure most people don't know about it.
Well, yeah, sure. I think that maybe the first thing to say is that from the larger world's point of view, when Hitler came to power, it wasn't manifest immediately to them what the future was going to be or how bad things already were for Jews. For example, the New York Times, I think, had a front page article written by one of its journalists saying, essentially, well, Hitler's just a cuddly guy, he's just a sweetie and it'll be okay. And so they're bonking a few Jews on the head, but that'll pass. And but for Jews, of course, things had started to go down south almost immediately and even earlier. There was so Ben-Gurion essentially sent Arlosorov to negotiate. And what happened was the Germans, there was a boycott of a Jewish boycott of German goods, of German enterprise. And Ben-Gurion packed Arlosorov off to negotiate a deal with Hitler's Germany. They were trying to get Jews out. And the deal was that Jews were not allowed to bring their money out, but they were allowed to purchase German goods and import them to the Yeshuv, and which helped the economy of the Yeshuv and helped get Jews out of Germany. From the German point of view, the Germans were able to turn around and say, hey, the Palestinian Jews aren't boycotting us. Why are you? About the American Jews, why are you doing that? So it was good for them. It was also good. This is the bad news that nobody really wants. It also helped their economy because the Jewish money was used to boost the German economy by the purchase of German goods. From the point of view of so it was an unsavory deal, but one that did succeed in getting 50 to 60,000 Jews out of Germany and into Palestine. But from the point of view of the Jabotinskian revisionists, any deal with the Nazis was a deal with the devil. And I think one can understand that point of view as well. But there was enormous furor in the Yeshuv and animosity in the newspapers and other places directed against Arlosorov, not unlike that famous rally in Zion Square where Netanyahu, where there were the signs comparing Rabin to a Nazi. And the end result was the same. So that agreement is a very significant element of the plot in the novel, in one way, and that's pretty much what is that what you meant?
Yeah, well, that explains it but how did it sort of reflect later, not on the murder of Rabin, but on the attack on the Knesset by Begin for reparations? I mean, that seems to be a comparable situation or stance.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting about Begin because the Labor Zionist Party line from the moment of Arlosorov's murder or assassination was that this had been the work of right-wing revisionist Russian Jews, and Begin resented that. And in the 1980s, he organized a commission to look into the murder of Arlosorov, and the result of the commission was no finding. It wasn't resolved one way or another. It hasn't been. It's a cold case. It hasn't been resolved to this day. I mean, what muddies the water is the fact that during the trial, a young Arab man confessed to the murder, and then 2 days later, he retracted the confession and claimed that he'd been bribed while in jail accused of another murder. He'd been bribed to confess to the murder, which was something that the court went with. They didn't know, that was never explored as a sort of radical and persuasive alternative to the idea that Stavsky and Rosenblatt, and there was somebody else as well, had committed the crime. And one of them was found guilty, and the sentence overturned on appeal on what, and in the novel I use the transcript of the trial, and I don't make anything up about it. And so when somebody at some point said that had it been tried in a British court, the conviction would have stood. But because it was a sort of partly Ottoman law, it was able. There was a something that it was able to overturn it. But I also want to say that, yeah, so that's it. I also want to say that the bulk of the novel involves, and this goes back to the issue of sort of British Jewish stuff, involves a sort of crisis of identity for this young man, Ivor Castle, who doesn't come out to Palestine as a Zionist. He really has no political interest at all. He has a best friend from Oxford who's also out in Palestine, Charles Gross, who is a diehard Jabotinskian. But Ivor himself is a naive and a romantic, and he's sort of there for an adventure, and he's not politically affiliated, and he gets caught up in everything. But I don't want to say too much about that.
Not too much, but you're talking all about history, and
yes,
we can go on all evening because this is so relevant to the history today and to the situation today. But let me ask you about literature. That
yes, oh good, yeah.
You have this love story that is very integral to the plot. It's very integral to history. And do you see the connection, or did you plan a connection between love and history, between the foregrounding of the love story and the backgrounding of the
well, the epigraph to the novel is a quote that from Pierre Vidal-Naquet that says, "To understand historical reality, it is sometimes necessary not to know the outcome." And I think one of the great dangers when you're writing historical fiction is that you know too much, and you want to make sure that your characters don't know too much, that the unprecedented things are about to occur historically, but nobody knows, nobody's aware of it, and you don't want to have that situation where the characters are too well aware, or somehow embedded in them is the future. So I like the idea of creating a character who moves through this charged historical world without any particular affiliation, without any particular in fact, he's caught. He's confused because in England, although he's done very well, there's a sort of seam of anti-Semitism that he's responding to. And in Palestine, he doesn't feel at home among the Jews of the Yishuv. He feels more English when he's there. So to have him get involved with this compelling and attractive artist, Siona Kerem, also allowed me, the love story allowed me to explore those areas of society in the Yishuv that maybe get pushed to the side because of all the big history that's going on, which is that there was a bohemian artistic world in both Jerusalem and Tel Aviv in those years. And this is a world that Ivor's able to enter. And that certainly his passionate involvement with Siona is that turns his life inside out. I think enables me to. I mean, there's a sense in which I want to have a character, and I think it would even exist now to say, like, what would it be like to have a life where you were free of political discussion, in the Middle East? I mean, everybody does, right, to a degree. It's not like regular life doesn't go on while all the big stuff is going on. And I'm always interested in the characters who get tossed one way or another by big history, whose small lives are impacted in ways that they're hardly even aware of. And so I throw him into this situation. I don't know if that answers the question.
I want to ask this, that this is an event of the Association of Israeli Association of Writers in English.
Yes.
And what you describe now as the alienation of being here, I think probably most people on this event have felt that or feel it at some time? We're olim, and like we leave the comforts of our home culture and we come to this different place, and we want it to be home. We are Zionists, most of us, and we want this to be home, but there is a pull and push, and at least for me, sometimes I've been here many years, a discomfort or alienation, and so I want to know whether the character you just described and the feelings that you put into his mouth, did you feel this way when you lived here? Was this how you felt, that, well, I'm English, but you must have faced anti-Semitism in England. I did. And then you come here and you're on a red balcony. I mean, like, what was it like for you? Is that how you created the character?
Well, the red balcony was a lot of fun. I can tell you that right now. But yeah, sure. I mean, I hope that I wasn't as naive as my character is. I mean, he's not a representation of me as a young man. But of course, the pushes and tugs and pulls and paradoxes of being English, where one thing I did give to Ivor in that sense was, this sense that, like, after all, nothing. I did experience considerable anti-Semitism in England, but on the other hand, nothing prevented me from going to Oxford in England. Nothing prevented people from becoming judges in England. Nothing prevented them from reaching the highest levels of society. And for example, one of the things I guess I wanted to do in terms of my father, for example, who was observant and who worked for the United Synagogues of Great Britain all his life, thought England was the most wonderful place. And despite the fact that he was very aware of lived through Mosley and through anti-Semitism, but I guess one of the things is, and as you say, I'm not alone in this sort of shifting feeling that when I was in England, I felt very Jewish, that was the most foregrounded thing about my personality within the society, and that it often arose in a very grotesque form. When I moved to Israel, I often felt quite English. Also there was no Premier League on TV in England in Israel in those years, which was like a nightmare. No first division Kadoregel. And I also experienced, before I moved to Israel, I was living in New York for a while, and I remember feeling like extraordinary. Like I'd never really seen Jewish people having fun before in my life, in a certain very, very deep way that came from living in a majority. And one of the things I experienced both in Israel and in America is that, and in New York certainly, was like, so you're Jewish, so what? Big deal. In England, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. So the so what aspect means that other aspects of your personality can come to the fore. But yeah, I mean, I think it's not only, people who've come from English-speaking countries, who come from anywhere, you're going to feel those things. But yeah, so I mean, sure, of course, my experience informs that consciousness to one degree or another. But
that
I had a lot of laughs.
That still doesn't. It doesn't tell us why you go back to the mandate, which is
right.
And when you told me you were writing about it, and I said to you, my father-in-law drove Arlosorff to the hospital.
Yeah, tell us about that.
When Begin was making the he decided to have another trial, and he called my father-in-law, who had 50 years before taken Arlosorff to the hospital or so. And they asked him again, what did he say? What did she say? Who was it? And he said, at the time, I don't really remember, but he did remember, and he said exactly what they had said. And so I could give you the answer to the book.
Well,
I
was Mrs. Arlosorff in the car with you, or was she in it? Because that's very important what she says because she said, both things.
He said he was in the car, and he said that he had been who did it.
Right.
And, he didn't want to say, because he didn't at the retrial, because he didn't want to stir up the politics. And it was amazing to him that the political issue was remaining so alive.
Right.
And it still is. It's still something that is discussed, which is crazy, because as you point out, Haim Arlosorff said at first it was one, and then later on it was another. That she kept changing her testimony, and evidence that would appear and disappear and blow up, and all kinds of things happened to change the opinions in the book.
Yeah.
But not of the people who were judging this thing, this whole case, because their decisions were political.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with the facts. The facts were kept changing. There were other
Karen, are you going to tell us, or you're not going to tell us?
Should I, Jonathan? Should I tell you?
No, not reveal what the book, but tell us what your father-in-law said.
Oh, he said it was Arabs.
Okay.
That's the end of it. It doesn't mean, because it wasn't determined in the retrial or the trial. So what my father-in-law said, and he said to me at the age of 80 or so, he said that to me, and he said, I just didn't want to bring it up. I said, I'm an old man and I don't remember anything. So he may have been an old man that didn't remember anything. So
because the weight of the evidence is quite strongly in the other direction. So, right. But not,
right.
Not 100%.
So that it's never clear.
It's not clear. But
he was an old man.
To answer your question about why I keep going back to dipping into that well as the British Mandate, I think it's either just the complete failure of imagination on my part, that I have nowhere else to go, or I don't really want to psych myself out, but there's clearly something about Brits and Jews that I'm trying to work out for myself, that but I'm able to tell a story about that that goes, I hope, way beyond my own attempts to figure that stuff out. But it offers a kind of breeding ground for identity issues. That if I think about it, one of the if I think about my childhood in England, and I don't think before 1967 that most English Jews were much interested in Israel at all. And that certainly, like in Hebrews, apart from certain movements, like my cousin Wendy, I saw is here, and her sister was in Habonim, I remember, but and Connie, but that I think we went to Hebrew school, and they were pretty much determined to make it so awful that nobody would ever want to have anything to do with Hebrew or Israel, because I think most people's parents were scared that their children would move to Israel. Not for their children, but just they didn't want them out of the country.
There was something to be scared of, because there were all these, if you remember, all those volunteers coming to
Yeah, I was one of them. Yeah, inoculating chickens against Newcastle disease.
But that was why I asked you before about love, relationships, and history, and what you said about relationships was that all relationships are infected by history, that they're determined in a way by history. But you have some very strong erotic scenes that are more than history.
Yeah. What do you want me to say about them?
What I want to say is that they balance the book in a way. The novel becomes much more alive than historical facts. And I wanted to know whether you were doing it because some editor said to you, put something.
No, not at all.
Well, Karen is trying to help make sales. Okay, all right. Who wants a historical novel, but a juicy erotic novel?
Oh, exactly that. Exactly. It's lucky I can still remember what erotic is, but at this stage, but yeah, no, of course there has to be a love story, and Siona Kerem, my wife is a painter, and I drew a lot on, to a degree, on not all aspects, but certain aspects of her being are filtered into that character. Although, I will say that I did also have Siona Tagger, the painter, as a model, not for the erotic part of it, but in terms of the experience of being an artist in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv in 1933. But no, the love story enabled me, and there are two women who Ivor gets involved with. One is an American debutante from Baltimore, and the other is a Palestinian Jewish woman, a woman of the Yishuv. And that enabled me to, I was on some panel the other day, and I think it was also came out of Israel, and someone asked me, they said, for people who want to be writers, and I know there are a number of writers who are here today, they said, do you have any advice? What do you tell your students? I said I used to tell my students, don't bore me, and don't bore yourselves, and don't you want to write a novel that people want to turn the page, or at this stage.
But there's more than going on. Okay, maybe you want to expand on the love stories. Okay, not just around your central character. I mean, the love story with Arlosorff and Goebbels. Wife, daughter, and
the Goebbels thing. I don't think there's any evidence to support that. I think it's just a rumor. And I don't think there's ever been anything concrete to suggest that they were anything more than school friends. And it seemed to me that there's been the sensationalism, that it's a desire to have Goebbels' wife involved romantically with Arlosorff. But I've never, of everything that I've read, I've never actually read anything that's convinced me that was the case. There doesn't seem to be any evidence at all. It's just something people, for sensational reasons, people want to imagine.
Fake news back then. But have you been able, maybe you want to elaborate, because people don't know perhaps what I'm referring to, but did you find the source of that rumor? Who put it out?
Not really. I didn't really. And as I said, I'm not a historian, and it's not something that I wanted in the novel, because I thought it would tilt it in ways I didn't want it to go.
It would be very distracting, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
be very what you have is a very clear story that goes through goes through the plot. Plot doesn't stop for a minute, and because my husband's grandfather was a builder and built the casino and built these places that you're talking about, I can fact check every step they take. Everything that seems to be a novel is based on reality, but always moves forward. There's always
I will confess that I don't think King Kong actually played at the Esther Cinema, but never mind that.
No, there's some other things there too, but never mind.
The novel.
There is a question, Jonthan, on your writing practice. As a writer, how do you do it?
Yeah. You mean when do I write?
I'm quoting from the question. Oh. What is your writing practice?
Oh, well, I generally write in the mornings and no more than about 2 hours a day. So I think that's and I never write when there are Premier League games on or Champions League games or any other game, and any game involving Tottenham Hotspur. I will
okay. I remember them.
But yeah, no, I write when I'm writing. And in the afternoon, I'll sometimes go over what I've written and revise. But I find that my creative abilities, are at their peak for a couple of hours in the morning. Pretty much, that's it.
Did you know where you were going when you started this book? Did you outline a plot, or are you dreaming in the morning?
Well, the first version of I only half knew where I was going, it turned out, because in the first version of the novel, half the novel was set in the past in 1933 to 4, and half the novel was set in the present, and involved a journalist based very loosely on, I think I saw Martin Fletcher. Are you there? On a journalist who's in Tel Aviv, who's researching the Arlosorov murder, looking back into it, and I wrote a whole novel with half set in the past and half in the present. And at some point, I realized that it wasn't working, and that the back and forth was not working. And so I eliminated everything that was in the present and then plunged myself back into the past. And of course, you can't change the historical fate. So I had that spine of what had actually happened. I wasn't going to mess around with that. And into that world, I threw these fictional figures. But it's also such a fascinating, and merge them with, Gershom Scholem pops up, Einstein pops up. You had Hebrew University in that year. I think the board of governors was Freud and Einstein. It's like not about, but there were only about 12 students. So, it was like a top-heavy board of governors. It's just an extraordinarily fascinating period. So I didn't know where I was going. You don't want to know too much about where you're going. I certainly didn't know where I was going in Iva's relationship with Siona and with Susanna. That emerged as I was writing.
And how is this now being your third book received in England?
It hasn't.
Well, let's say your two previous books.
I'll tell you something interesting about that. all my books have been received much better in America than in England, and this is maybe personal experience, probably irrelevant, but like I only recently discovered that my American agent I've been with for many years, that her UK agent never sent the book out in England. He said it wasn't right for the market. And when I asked her why it wasn't right for the market, she said, I don't know, something to do with Jerusalem. And I think we know what that means. So I hope that they, at some point, somebody in England gets to take a look at it. But maybe, maybe it's better not to get what you wish for, because who knows what the response would be. But I don't know, But I mean, all my books before this one have come out in the UK, and I, of course, would like this book to come out in the UK, but I don't know. But here it's doing just fine.
The response has been really amazing for a book that's only just out.
Yeah, it's been really nice. And there's a very nice review in the LA Times coming on Sunday that I'm hoping that Spielberg will read while he's having his coffee, and his bagel.
Yeah, we all hope that. Let me just interject for a minute. I don't know if you're aware of this, but last week there was a sort of a rock musical immersion theater event in Jerusalem called "Who Killed Haim Arlosorff?"
Oh, I didn't know that.
It was quite amazing. I don't know if anyone in the audience also went to a performance. It was quite amazing. It was sort of Gothic genre in an abandoned building in the heart of Jerusalem, and everything that you've described was played out. The speeches were played out. The characters were the same characters, the Arab and the Jews, and the right wing and the left wing. And in the end, it was, okay, everybody, let's dance on the blood of Haim Arlosorff.
Yes.
Because it became such a farce. The whole thing was a farce. Who killed Arlosorff? The whole trial was a farce. That's the way it was portrayed in this musical. It was all turned into a farce. I mean, they say they looked at history as that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And no, I didn't know about it. And thanks for telling me. If you read the transcript of the trial, it wasn't a farce. I mean, the trial was quite extraordinary, and the level of detail that the respective barristers on the prosecution and the defense went into is they amassed an enormous amount of evidence. It's just fascinating. It's
one of the things that they,
of course,
brought out
90 years later.
Right. One of the things they brought out in the play was the suspicion. Well, this I actually learned from Karen. I didn't know this, that Arlosorff was alive when he got to hospital.
Yes.
I always thought that he was killed, but he wasn't killed on the spot. And there were all these rumors. Of course, it could be like the previous one you talked about, fake news, that the doctors messed up in the operating theater. Somebody, there was all this was played out.
Yeah, that's in my novel, and I'm not sure that was a rumor. But
can you elaborate? Just tell us
not really. I don't want to give everything that happens away.
Okay.
To read the book, and you can get it on Amazon if you're if you can't buy it, because we can't buy it directly. We have to, by the time it gets here, it takes about a couple of weeks. So you can buy it on Kindle, and you can
support Israel. Get it on Stimatsky.
Yeah. There's also an audio book with a guy with a very nice English accent. So
yeah, and he does other accents well. But the essence.
I haven't heard it. Yeah.
The idea of suspense, I thought, was really well organized.
Thanks.
That, you know, this is a trial that everybody in Israel knows about. I don't know if anyone outside of Israel cares, because I saw one of my friends left right in the middle because he said, you know, I don't know any of this. But I know that it is something that has been gone over and over and over. And yet the book turns out to be one surprise after another. And they're facts that you had, that all of us have, and yet we didn't know that. We didn't know it this way. So I think that's a very interesting element that is something I want to learn how to do. Can you teach me?
You know how to do it, but I'm trying to evoke a gone world, and I'm interested not only in the Arlosorov trial, but also in capturing that world of Palestine in 1933, which was, by the way, you know, relatively tiny population. That's another thing that it's hard to get hold of. That Tel Aviv was like a village, you know.
Everyone knew everyone else in Tel Aviv, and in the 70s, in the 80s, some letters were found in a suitcase on the street in Tel Aviv, and they put them in the paper. They did an article about these girls, these teenage girls in the 20s, who were writing love letters they were writing about their love lives to each other. And when the article came out, my mother-in-law looked and she said, "Oh, that's Ella. That's that's this." And she said, "I didn't know." Anyway, she threw out all her papers at that point.
I had somebody reviewed the novel in a small book review that came out of Washington, D.C. It was reviewed by a woman who was a novelist, and she said she had a couple of quibbles about the novel. One was, she said, nobody in the 1930s just went to bed with someone a couple of days after they met them. I thought, oh yeah, you really know how everybody behaved in the 1930s, you know, like the prudish bunch. They went, you know, like Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence, Henry Miller, they weren't doing anything. And then she said the other thing was, you have a young American woman who drinks, and prohibition didn't end until 1933 in the United States. So why was she drinking in Palestine? Well, you know, it's like that happened. And also during prohibition, people drank, you know, but it was bizarre.
But one went to Palestine to escape prohibition.
Exactly.
And drinking was because of the British, the business of whiskey became very popular in the 30s.
And Scottish beer with Hebrew writing on it that was sold at this, with a picture of beer, with a picture of it, a British guy on a horse with a pith helmet was one of the most popular. That's the kind of stuff, you know, that for a novelist is just meat and drink. You know, that's really what you want to know, is not who killed Arlosorov, but what kind of cigarettes were people smoking.
Exactly, the cigarettes, what you wore, what you didn't wear, what you know, the way the weather affected people without air conditioning.
Right.
All kinds of little details that I found fascinating. Do we have other questions? Because I would like to, you know, keep going, but I think that perhaps we have worn out.
Well, one of the questions that were asked, which I think that you answered, is can you elaborate on how, in your view, the murder is still relevant to our present political situation?
Yeah, well, I think I did say that right at the beginning, that it's a sort of, that I think there was the schism between left and right. The Arlosorov murder made that concrete. and I don't think it's ever. It's just got wider and wider as the years have gone by. I mean, look, I mean, even though I should say this, that the revisionists had their own plan for getting Jews out of Europe, which involved getting Jews out of Poland and stuff. It's not that like anybody was against having Jews come into the Yishuv, but it was about doing a deal with the Nazis. That was the opposition. Not too different to those who opposed doing a deal with Arafat from the point of view of the right. Yeah.
Right. That's why before I asked you about Begin and reparations, not Begin and the commission, but Begin and reparations. And
I don't know about that, about the reparations.
Oh, well, there was all what we see today of the demonstrations outside the Knesset. That was exactly the same that happened in the 50s with Begin leading riots against the Knesset.
Oh, right.
Against reparations. I mean, it was terrible time. I mean, were you a supporter of Nazis or not? Are you got blood on your hands or not?
Right.
Very similar.
Yeah.
All of our times are terrible. But I have to add one thing. Mark Levinson had the solution to the Arlosorov murder, and he had the solution. He said, his wife killed him. I thought that was the best solution. So
I said that, and I'm not kidding. His wife owned a pistol that matched the bullet that killed Arlosorov. His wife was cozy with the chief of police in Jerusalem.
And his wife also...
That's great.
His wife also, my father-in-law said when he wanted to take his wife to the hospital, she said she was busy.
Yes, and of course the business of his being cozy with Mrs. Goebbels might have entered into it, but was only typical of Arlosorov's behavior. He was quite a womanizer.
So were they all.
Well, Arlosorov is out of the picture by about page 10 of my novel, so that's for another novel. But yeah, well, Arlosorov left his own pistol at home when he went to Germany, and he said when he came back that he felt he didn't need it. He said, "No Jew is going to kill me."
Well, he was also worried about airport security. I mean, he could never have gone through with a pistol.
I think that probably went by train. Yeah.
You can now move to Kestner's murder, and which is almost the same. And we've got lots of stuff that you can write about here.
I think I'm done.
I think you're done. I think you can write about America.
Done with the mandate. Yeah. Over now. Yeah.
Well, I think on behalf of the Writers Association in Israel, we want to thank you for giving us so much of your time and so many of your secrets, and I'm sure that everyone will want to read the book.
I hope so. Well, thank you for having me, Karen. It was really a thrill. It was somehow nice to be back in Israel, even via Zoom. So, a great pleasure for me. Thank you.
Please let us know when you're back actually physically in the country, and we build an event around you and other writers. It would be great.
That would be wonderful. I'd love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Karen and I had a lot of fun in Tel Aviv, didn't we, Karen?
Yes. This was a very
1977 to 8. Yeah.
I have other things
on the promenade at the end of Arlosorov Street. I know.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you
you.
very much, Jonathan. And we shall have another event when you come here.
Wonderful.
Everyone go off mute for a minute and just give a round of applause.
Yay.
Hey, that was fantastic.
Very kind. Thank
That
you.
was awesome. Oh,
Thank you.
That was very interesting.
Thank you so much. It's really kind of you. All right, guys.
Thank you, Jonathan. Happy Purim.
Toda.
Hey.
Happy what?